sense, and you tacked on so many, all of these issues. There's a sense that the disaster is the hurricane, the disaster is the flooding or the winds or the electricity. But what I hear is that there's another layer that needs to be unpacked. Can you just put a somewhat finer point on the economic crisis, which initially you said Puerto Rico found itself in, but how it is that Puerto Rico found itself here and how it is related to this subordinate status?
This is a great question, and I appreciate you bringing it up because feminists in Puerto Rico have argued, and among others, and have
Mm,
said the disaster is political. It's not just natural. So a lot of folks have said that we should just stop saying that referring to disasters as natural disasters.
yeah.
Disasters are also political because the ways in which we experience extreme weather events like hurricanes
Mm,
is really shaped by what politicians choose to do and what not to do. So, how we prepare for these, how we recover from these, are as important as the magnitude of the event, as the amount of rain or wind that they bring. So, specifically, when it comes to the economy and how this impacts the recovery, Puerto Rico's colonial status has made it very, very hard for Puerto Ricans to develop an economy that can thrive. It's important to put Puerto Rico in the context in the broader global political economic context, right? One of the reasons for why the United States has been so interested in Puerto Rico and to try to show that Puerto Rico is a prosperous
yeah.
place is because they were trying to give the impression that capitalism was successful
Yeah.
and that capitalism in the Caribbean and Latin America more generally was the way to go for Latin Americans. And they wanted to compare a place like Puerto Rico to a place like Cuba, where they wanted to point out that Cuba was under extreme misery because it was Soviet led, because it was communist. However, after 1975, we start to see that the United States stops investing in with greater impetus in a place like Puerto Rico, and more
Mm,
policies are started to start to be adopted to try to address what a lot of people expected, which was a crisis, because we start to witness that growth was stalling in Puerto
mm,
Rico, and later on it started to dip. So Puerto Rico was having a really, really hard time sustaining a prosperous economy to the point where there were artificial injections of
mm,
money
mhm.
through tax exceptions that brought in a lot of manufacturing companies that were setting up shop in Puerto Rico because they were able to get away with not paying taxes that they would otherwise have to pay in the United States, in the continental United States.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that it's actually not a sustainable plan for growth because they're not leaving a ton of money in Puerto Rico by way of taxes because they're
Right.
experiencing tax
Mhm.
exceptions, not just federal, but local tax exceptions
Sure.
under the idea that this was the way to attract economic activity. So
Sure.
this injected a lot of money by way of income, right? And Puerto Rico was able to withdraw income tax revenue from those who were employed in these industries.
Mhm.
But under the Clinton administration, they decided that they would actually eliminate some of these tax incentives that came through a section of the IRS tax code that gave Puerto Rico, gave companies setting up shop in Puerto Rico tax exception. When they eliminate this section, known as Section 936, Puerto Rico then experiences a major, major crisis whereby people move, they lose their jobs. If you look at who
Mm.
leaves Puerto Rico, it's people who are working, it's the working age population who need to be able to sustain their lives and their families'
Sure.
lives,
Mhm.
right? So those are the people that move. And once they do, you start losing a lot of that income tax revenue. And all of a sudden, the economy was no longer sustainable. So these are some of the ways in which that colonial relationship has impacted the extent to which the local government is able to make up for the inadequacies of the federal government when it comes to disaster preparedness and disaster recovery.
I kind of feel as well that this is a political quandary that I just don't know if this business of statehood is going to be resolved in our time. Like, to what extent can we really explore other alternatives at this point in Puerto Rico's journey and America's journey? Really, it feels like they've got so much fish to fry at this point, right? What's
Yeah.
What's the outlook?
It's a hard place to be for those who care about Puerto Rico, and
Mm.
I think a lot of people who care about Puerto Rico feel similarly, where they've lost hope for a different future, for a
Mm.
future where Puerto Rico is not under this colonial relationship. But I think there are folks also holding on to hope because they understand that their ability to dream an alternative future can actually enable that future. The ability to think that a different Puerto Rico is possible opens up possibilities. If we already foreclose the possibilities
Ah,
for a resolution to Puerto Rico, then what is it all for? Why should activists go out and do their work?
yeah.
So a lot of people haven't lost that hope, and they are actually engaging in different means of political activity and mobilization and
Mhm.
activism. And I think people find a lot of hope in thinking about decolonizing in multiple ways, not just decolonizing from this relationship with the United States, but also decolonizing people's minds and the idea that it is impossible for Puerto Ricans to govern themselves. This idea that the United States actually invested in intentional efforts to instill in Puerto Ricans, and not just Puerto Ricans, all minorities.
Yeah.
Historically, the United States has made a lot of people in this world believe that they need a major power to govern them, that
Definitely.
they need this government to take over, right? To do things for them. And I think Puerto Ricans are aware in many cases that this idea that Puerto Rico without the United States would be crisis, would be the third
Ah,
world, is no longer as appealing because they realize that even though they are still part of the United States, they're still experiencing crisis and neglect,
mhm.
recurrent, and the inability of the US government and those who govern it to learn from what they've already done, from the neglect and the actual active ways that they've negatively affected Puerto Ricans. So folks are really hanging on to other sources of hope, to helping each other, mutual aid,
Yeah.
mutual support, projects in their communities where they don't wait for government to come in and go and restore their energy or give them food and water. People realize that if they wait, they might lose their lives. The most vulnerable might lose their lives. So after Fiona, people went out and they
Yeah.
got together and they already had plans. And
Yeah.
they went out and they cleared the roads. In some cases, municipalities hired their own restoration crews, power restoration crews.
Mm.
And they went and actually uh, restored power in various communities.
Mhm.
We see this in the community of Ay Bonito, for instance, many of
Mm.
whom now have power in a mountainous region that tends to be in places that tend to be neglected. We see it in other communities as well. So there is still hope on the ground, and a lot of people